welcome. I'm Chris. Very important situation when people think tanks, artillery. Can that move from the Philippines to Guam to Japan? The answer? Actually, yes. And the Army is all over that. We are joined today by a powerhouse Army leader whose responsibility it is to work on the expeditionary deployment sustainment elements of the Army. Let's welcome Major General Gavin Gardner. What a pleasure to have you, sir. Thanks so much for talking to us. You got a full plate, I'm sure.
Hey, Chris, thanks to you and thanks to really Warrior Maven to give me the opportunity as the commander of 8th Theater Sustainment Command, a part of U.S. Army Pacific, and which is a sub-service component of U.S. Indo-PACOM out here in Hawaii. Really thrilled to be on the program today to kind of give you insights as to exactly what you just talked about. How does the Army use land power to sustain the joint force?
Absolutely, sir. And indeed, one of the things I wanted to start with was just in a general sense, people might not fully understand how deployable and expeditionary the Army is. When people think the tyranny of distance is the famous phrase for the Pacific and the vast maritime expanse, people think Army, how can it move around? Where can it be based? What kind of role can it have? And the fact is, it's so central to the entire joint enterprise. You work on this, you know this. Let's talk a little bit about the critical role the Army would provide in any kind of contingency.
Well, thanks, Chris. And first and foremost, we get that directive right out of Title 10 that directs the Army to be the waterborne transportation within littorals, within, the archipelagic regions of the world. The Army has that responsibility first and foremost to provide that transportation. That's right out of Title 10. Additionally, our job is to sustain forces from the water, just like we do on the land, within those littoral brown water commons, I'll call it. And so the Army has had this historically. If you look over time in history in particular, whether we're starting back in the War of 1812, the Army had boats then, more prominently, especially out here in the Pacific campaigns, both with Admiral Nimitz in the Central Quarter and General MacArthur in the kind of the southwest approach against the Japanese. Army watercraft were essential to part of the amphibious operations that, quite frankly, to my brothers in Europe, more of those took place out here in the Pacific with the Army, no less, than took place in the European theater. And, that really, the ability of the Army to deliver logistics over the shore led to the ultimate conquest and victory over the Japanese in this Pacific theater during World War II.
Roger that, sir. And as the commander of the 8th Theater Sustainment Command, overseeing these watercraft, I can't help but think of the massive elements of your mission. Hasn't this changed to a large degree in terms of keeping pace with evolving technology? You think in terms of what the situation is now, the next generation ship-to-shore connectors, they can move an Abrams tank, 70 tons. The Navy's joint high-speed vessel, now expeditionary fast transport, that can move 600 tons. So the idea of being able to potentially move a mechanized force is pretty realistic, and you're kind of making that happen. And you served in Afghanistan, we should say, so you're a combat leader.
Yeah, thanks so much. And really, what this starts with is a recognition by Army senior leaders really 5 years ago. That is the focus from the National Defense Strategy was to look at the pacing threat, which is China out here, quite frankly, but also Russia and North Korea. Is, hey, how do we make sure the Army is postured to deal with those potential adversaries in this region? Well, to your point, there's a lot of water out here. But ultimately, combat power starts on the land. We'll use the water as a methodology for transfer, and then ends up back on the land. And so Army leaders recognize that. And so where Army watercraft were more of a European and really Central Command focus over the last 25 years of the global war on terrorism, the shift started to reposition Army watercraft here in the Indo-PACOM. So we're at 50% of the force, but we're growing. The plans are to expand the Army's presence really in what we call the first island chain, in this case, Japan, Korea, Philippines, down towards Singapore, and then also to the second island chain, which is Guam, Papua New Guinea, parts of Australia, and then here in Hawaii. So we have started to grow that force. We just stood up a 5th composite watercraft company in Japan. And with the plans to stand up a second one here in a couple of years. And really what that does for you is really grow the Army's capacity to move logistics, but also operational maneuver combat forces across the island chains, first, second, and third, in support of the joint force. So not only for the Army, but we routinely provide lift and sustainment for the Marines, the Air Force, and even to the Navy at times when maybe some of their vessels are unavailable. We fill that gap.
Roger that. Well, when people think mechanized land deployment, they'll think of something like the Gulf War or OIF, where there's all this staging and pre-deployment preparation, and how difficult it is using Transcom to move a 70-ton Abrams from one place to another. Well, as you point out, given your mission, that's happening now. And so it's feasible to take a mechanized unit and bring it from southern Japan to the Philippines, to Guam. You talked about some new Army watercraft. Let's pick up on what some of those might be specifically to add some context, and how much can you move and how fast could you move should that be necessary?
Yeah, so what we don't talk about all the time about here is rehearsing for our worst day. And so through Operation Pathways, U.S. Army Pacific, as a part of INDOPACOM, practices doing exactly that. How do you take combat forces from the continental United States, bring them across this vast instance of the Pacific, and then deliver them to shore? So recently, literally 3.5 weeks ago in the Philippines, you had a U.S. Navy cargo ship. What we did is we call it Combined Joint Logistics Over the Shore, a floating platform. We really took a vessel that had nearly 500 pieces of equipment. It opens up the back deck, it drives down the ramp, goes on a floating dock, and then hits our Army watercraft. And then literally we'd fill the vessel, drive it up to the shore, and literally hit right on the beach. So we didn't need an infrastructure, didn't need a pier, went right onto the beach and delivered over 150 pieces of, to your point, of combat power ashore at a place of our choosing. And that's what's really critical, because what you're doing is you're providing the operational commander options. Army watercraft provide options on maneuver that you wouldn't normally have, that, maybe some of the port infrastructure, to your point, isn't nearly as vast or as capable as maybe what we're used to in the continental United States or in a more developed theater like Europe. Well, Army watercraft allow you to do that. And so providing that joint logistics over the shore is what we do. But it's an exciting time. Currently today, the Army has its prototyped Mission Support Vessel Light, MSV Light. It's here with us in Oahu, and we're going to run it through its paces. It's designed to move one 70-ton tank, 2 Bradleys, 2 HIMARS, 2 Strykers, or a company plus of infantrymen, and really take them that last tactical mile, up to 300-mile range that it can go. So another way that you can deliver combat power to any beach on the planet at a high speed under our timing and tempo that we want. So that's about using Army watercraft to do operational maneuver that puts us in a position to deliver precision fires, precision force protection, and so when people think about that, they got to remember that that's what its intended purpose is. Operational reach, operational maneuver. Sustainment's important, but at the end of the day, our job is to give options to the commander.
Indeed, sir. Well, you mentioned the Philippines and Japan. Looking at a map, one would see the Philippines, it's about 500 miles or so from Taiwan. Southern Japan is maybe in the island areas, 500 miles from the Philippines. I mean, these aren't unmanageable distances, right, sir? I mean, if you have watercraft, you can essentially quickly be expeditionary, both in the air, if you have something like a tiltrotor in the new Flora, or you have a watercraft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we think about operational employment and really rehearsing for deterrence, we want to operate forward where we think, quite frankly, we might have to, fight for real. And so whether we're operating in the Southwest Islands, in northern Luzon, or quite frankly, even down in Indonesia around the Straits of Malacca, another key piece of terrain where the Army could be used in order to put an adversary at risk, you got to be able to use maneuver. And what we can't afford to do is tied up our strategic aircraft to do that kind of maneuver. Number one, they're limited assets, but number two, you can actually put a lot more on an Army watercraft to deliver. For instance, an Army C-5 aircraft, you can put 2 M1s. On an Army LSV, I can put 24 M1 tanks. That much more of a delivery of combat power. I can put almost a battalion minus ashore versus one aircraft gives you half of a platoon. And as a former armor officer, that's pretty significant and pretty important. Now, the speed of delivery is a little bit slower. Army watercraft aren't going to move as fast as a C-5A, but when it comes to staying power, combat power delivered at the time and place that the commander needs, Army watercraft open up a lot of options for leaders.
It sounds like you mentioned there was a new one. That's a massive amount of combat power in terms of being expeditionary. That, correct me if I'm wrong, General, but that's somewhat unprecedented in terms of an ability to move that much land power. And then as part of that, you mentioned the Philippines. There's a massive plus up now with new bases in the Philippines. I have to think that some armor and some forward positioning watercraft might increasingly show up there. So I know that was kind of two questions at one, but
no worries. Now, look, first and foremost, the Philippines is a sovereign nation, and everything we do there, we do on their behalf and in close consultations with them. But what are the ways that you can, deal with that tyranny distance from the west coast of the United States into the first island chain is, you look for places that you can pre-position stocks and equipment, and that's one of the things that we've worked in partnership with, not just the Philippines, but today in Korea, in Japan, in Australia, places that we can pre-position equipment. And then through the use of whether it's an Air Force C-130, C-17, C-5, or Army watercraft or a Navy EPF, now all I have to do is move the troops in, rapidly draw that equipment, and then I have options to maneuver anywhere inside that first island chain. And that causes a dilemma for adversaries because Army equipment, Marine equipment that's ashore, it's hard to find, it's hard to see. Quite frankly, the way they've developed their anti-access area denial weapon systems is designed to go after big ships and big targets. Well, our stuff's small, so it can maneuver, it can hide amongst the other noise, amongst the civilian watercraft that's there. It creates a targeting dilemma. And again, we think it is one of our asymmetric advantages that we can put others at risk by our ability to take pre-positioned stocks and maneuver it around, again, to cause a dilemma for others.
Roger that. Well, I wanted to ask you about networking because that came to mind because Army Pacific and your unit in particular is so joint focused. When when equipment or heavy armor is moving across the ocean, you'll want to network with warships and drones and nearby manned aircraft, potentially even satellites, and command and control across various land nodes as well. How do you look at that as you see theater sustainment and the advent of more watercraft?
Well, again, I mean, I think you always have to give the adversary a vote. So really, the last time that we campaigned and really thought about convoy protection, I'll use that terminology, was really since World War II. Otherwise, we've had an uncontested, kind of ability to move amongst the air and the sea. But we've been thinking about this for multiple years now. So we rehearse this as a joint force, whether it is securing air corridors, securing sea lanes, and then to your point, it is a combined, because we have absolutely wonderful allies and partners out here, and joint operation to really create axis of advance that are secured. And then where you see the threat, you take all those different multi-domain opportunities to negate those. It could be something you're doing through space, through cyber, from a physical presence. Never underestimate the ability to deceive. I mean, deception has been one of the key tenets, and it's also a key tenet of potential adversaries of show one thing in one hand, do something with another. And so all of that comes together in order to maneuver, in this case, Army watercraft effectively. So we have the comm systems in place. We rehearse it all the time with our key partners. It is absolutely a operation. There is just no like, hey, you're going to go do a logistics move. No way. It's an operation. So it is sequenced, it is coordinated, and all those things that we did for 25 years in Iraq and Afghanistan on the ground, where you would open and clear convoy routes with route clearance and overhead coverage and air weapons teams and even Air Force platforms. Well, guess what? We're doing the same thing over here, but you're just thinking about it for both the air domain and the sea domain in order to ensure that we're able to project power as needed.
I'm glad you mentioned that. One of my heroes said, that new innovation, it was General Murray, the former CG of Futures Command, said that new technology changes maneuver formations. And so you mentioned concepts of operation, and I don't think a lot of people easily make that equation. When you look at the concepts of operation that were learned, practiced, and proved effective in the Middle East to a certain extent, with, of course, adaptation, are being implemented and successfully, what would the word be, adapted to the current Pacific environment.
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, the Army, has a center of lessons learned because we don't want to relearn those lessons. And so you call those, you got to be a study of history. But, quite frankly, we study what's going on in the Ukraine right now. And really, it's the use of autonomous vehicles to deny watercraft. Or, as we're thinking about here, is how do you leverage autonomous to do sustainment and operational maneuver? So recently out here in Hawaii, we practiced with an autonomous vessel that was in the Hawaii operational area. It was being controlled all the way on the East Coast for a while. Then they passed control forward to soldiers on the ground, who then passed the control to an airplane. All of that was maneuvering autonomous watercraft and able to deliver sustainment. That is incredible. So people don't think that technology is here. It's here. We're rehearsing with it. And now it's going to be about scalability, because what I think we want to ultimately do, when you think the threat's highest, you'd want to use autonomous for all the right reasons, because every life, every American life is important. So if I can have an autonomous watercraft deliver sustainment or operational maneuver, why not use that? I also think the technology is there that we can scale it such that instead of building the Liberty ships, as we were cranking out one of those a day at the height of 1944 in order to ensure that the Allies had all the logistics and sustainment they needed, we could crank out autonomous water vessels for very cheap, by the way, and then you just send them on their way. And it becomes a targeting dilemma. And if they want to go target small autonomous watercraft, well, then they're not targeting bigger platforms that have a much longer reach from our perspective. So it's kind of another dilemma you put on an adversary that has to think about, well, how do I deal with those Americans now?
Roger that. And when you mentioned autonomy, I have to think AI in terms of the rapid implementation. I understand that's an expertise of yours, to kind of how AI might better integrate with autonomy to better facilitate, expedite this expeditionary mission.
Yeah, I mean, I think, really, this is where we have taken from commercial industry. And I don't want to highlight the names, but there are distribution companies out there. You probably know them. You probably receive packages from them every day. But their ability to see the transportation network, understand the volume of cargo that needs to go, and the different modes with which to connect those globally is something that the Joint Force has really kind of had to look into and say, hey, that's a best practice. Now, where that might be scaled for efficiency, obviously they want to make money. We're going to go for efficiency is important, but it's also about effectiveness. So it has to be at the time, the tempo, the location we need it. But you can use the advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning that they are doing today and give it a military application. So if I lose a logistics node, an airfield, a port, the system will automatically reroute in real time aircraft, ships, and really tell us like, hey, you're not going here, you're going to go there. And instead of falling behind or doing these things by, our fat fingers, which is what we used to do forever, the machines will kick out in a nanosecond 3 or 4 options for leaders to make a decision. Say that's what we're going to do. And then it really kicks out the orders to everybody in transit to make those moves. That's revolutionary for us.
Roger that. Well, I want to ask you about this contingency. Obviously, the whole effort and the key message, as you've talked about repeatedly, peace through strength, deterrence, avoid conflict. But part of that involves looking at contingencies. What if an occupying Chinese force had to be extricated from Taiwan? Obviously, one wants to avoid that. The Pentagon reports talk about fait accompli, a potential Chinese effort to acquire the island so quickly as to make it impossible to defend. When you look at numbers, available troops in South Korea, Japan, US presence, and then available hardware and armor, the answer is, I mean, obviously it's a high cost, it's a high risk. No one would want to have to do this. It is conceivable. It seems realistically possible. And so on very least, in terms of a world of theory, you have to be thinking of how to be prepared for that should that day come, heaven forbid.
Well, I mean, Chris, as you know, ultimately that's a political decision that the National Command Authority would make. But as a military professional, we obviously think about these things all the time, as you just highlighted. So we're constantly, executing war games. We're executing thought, a lot of professional thought of, hey, what was done in the past, what we could do in the future, but more importantly, what can we leverage to give us asymmetric advantages? And so I do think forward positioning matters, being in the first island chain matters, but more importantly, practicing, rehearsing, preparing for that worst day, because I don't want to get to the Super Bowl and have never gone and done a practice. No, we scrimmage every day out here. We practice it every day. We're practicing it with our allies and partners. We clearly practice it as a joint force. That is a key tenet of Admiral Paparo's Prevail strategy. We're all in. Trust me, every day we're all in. And so our ability to think our way through that, and then more importantly, Americans are very brutal with each other when things don't work. So when you run a play and you get tackled behind the line of scrimmage, and that happens out here with logistics, trust me, we are brutal in the after action review process, but we learn from it. But you only get innovation through trying. And so we're testing out new theories. We're testing new locations. We're testing new technologies. Some are winners, some aren't. But you know what? We're going to keep prying at it. The other point I'm going to tell you is, and this is an effective part of deterrence. What am I showing in my hand and what am I hiding back? All right. So I'm not going to show everything I can do for obvious reasons. All right. I want people thinking about it. So I want people to think I'm a lefty when I'm really a righty. That tenet maintains itself out here with logistics as well. We are showing some things that we're capable of. We're maybe hiding a few things that we're not, and that's by design, because
General, excellent. One of the things I'm thinking about just listening to you is this idea of amphibious assault. Imagine what, with the land power movement, the expeditionary power that you talked about now being possible with the Army in terms of watercraft. Imagine how that would fortify and supplement any kind of amphibious operation. It has to just be staggering.
Well, I mean, again, I think when you think about the future technology, both what the joint force is looking at, so whether, the Marines now have a new amphibious assault vehicle, much more scaled up, from what they used to have. The Army, maintains its ability to deliver combat power over the shore. Our ability from an Army to have a future vertical lift that really extends the range beyond what a current CH-47 and a UH-60 does. Again, it's all about angles. If I can put too many angles against an adversary, now they've got to spread their forces. Now they have to think more than just in a small avenue of approach. Now they've got a 360-degree problem set. And that doesn't take away also cyber and space. And so multi-domain task forces that are out here, both the 1st and the 3rd that are out here as a part of U.S. Army Pacific Command, those things that set the conditions before you would ever hit a amphibious assault, if that's what the commander elected to do, like we're going to shape the battlefield. We're going to modify it on our terms to complicate what the enemy is thinking about, what they want to do to defend, so that they're never going to see what's going to hit them. And that's how you achieve dominance. You shape the environment through all 5 domains: in cyber, in space, in the air, on the ground, on the sea, and I'll even add under the sea, which, by the way, our Navy's pretty good at as well. And we kind of seek a little bit of dominance there. And then I think you throw in the new technology of what autonomous brings in the air, on the sea, under the sea. And I believe you create one hell of a dilemma for anybody out there that thinks that the United States and its allies and partners are not ready to deter out here and, quite frankly, prevail and fight and win.
Well, that leads me to my last question, which is the multi-domain task force. And you talk so much about training and preparation. What kinds of things are you and Admiral, is it Admiral or General Paparo? It's Admiral, isn't it?
It is Admiral Samuel Paparo.
I knew that. Okay, well, let's just start that again. What kinds of things are you and Admiral Paparo thinking about in terms of multi-domain task forces, training preparation, rehearsals, being ready for contingencies with a mind to networking and Army watercraft?
Look, I think Admiral Paparo has challenged the Army as a part of the Joint Force to really use multi-domain task forces to create, again, a ton of dilemmas for the adversary. So last year, in consultation with allies, we deployed the mid-range capability missile system to the Philippines. And it, quite frankly, upset them. And it should, because it's a hypersonic battery that's capable of delivering a multiple type of weapon system. So what is like Admiral Paparo challenged the 8th Theater Sustainment Command with is, hey, how do you keep that thing in the fight? How do you get the next round of missiles to it? How do you keep it maintained? And more importantly, how do you operationally maneuver it? So again, I don't become easily targetable. And I can just assure you that we are doing that as a part of the multi-domain task forces. We rehearse this all the time. And again, that's a new capability for our Army. And so we're constantly evolving the tactics, techniques, and procedures on how to do those things as a logistician to really give operational maneuver to the commander so that they can deliver the fires and effects at the time and place of our choosing.
Spoken like the American we imagine you to be. We like to talk to great Americans. General, sir, thank you so much. Major General Gavin Gardner, who is the commanding general of the 8th Theater Sustainment Command. Truly an honor to have you talk to us and offer your perspective. Thanks for your time, General.
Hey, Chris, again, thanks to you. Thanks to Warren Maven. I really do appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And anything you or your other viewers have for questions, we look forward to engaging you in the future as to how we move forward, not only as U.S. Army Pacific, but as U.S. Indo-PACOM Command out here as we keep the status quo. We like the status quo out here, free and open Indo-Pacific. That's our job. That's what we do every day.
Roger that. Well, gosh, General, I could talk to you for hours. This is amazing. Thank you so much. You have such an expertise with this stuff. This is going to be great. Anything I forgot? I mean, obviously, I sort of ended. I'm not really, but what did I forget, or what would you like to emphasize, General, that I didn't ask about? And if
I think you did a great job of hitting your kind of things talking to you. I was going to talk to you, and I probably could have expanded some on our ability to leverage industry and contracting. In this case, contracted watercraft as well as part of the overall suite of things that we want to do out here. So I'm actually willing to take a few minutes to maybe give you an opportunity to say, hey, are there other methods with which we can, get after Army watercraft? And I could really talk about our ability to contract watercraft as well and use allies and partners, because those are two other key facets that it was on me. I didn't get to it.
No, I meant to ask about that. I'm really glad you mentioned that, General. Let me give you a question that'll set that up. 3, 2. One of the things the industry talks about a lot is trying to anticipate capability gaps or requirements that the military is going to have. What problems can we solve in advance to offer solutions to the Army? How are you working with industry to help expedite this process of innovation and integrating new watercraft? What are some of the methods you're using, and what are some of the successes you're having?
Hey, Chris, great question. So first and foremost, the American way of war has always been to rely with our industry partners. Again, go back in time, read the book Freedom's Forge. We would not have had the arsenal of democracy that we talk about today if it wouldn't have been with that partnership between the Department of Defense, which before then was the War Department, and obviously U.S. American industry. So we do that today, and we do that through our ability to contract capability forward. And so in this case, we've been talking about Army watercraft. Well, depending on the crisis or the time, I exceed my current on-hand capability, but I'm not hamstrung. I contract with industry, U.S. industry, to bring operational support vessels, other connectors in order to deliver capability forward for the Joint Force. And let me be the first to tell you, American industry has responded. I have vessels out here right now operating underneath my command, being complementary to those Army watercraft in order to deliver logistics in the first, in the second, in the third island chain. Now, we're not done. What we owe industry is a long-term need, a long-term vision of where we think we need them to supplement our gray Army watercraft to support the Joint Force. And we have that. We think we know what that is. And right now we're working through how do we better contract. And what I would like to use as an example is I'll use either life insurance or your local fire department. When I have a local, when I pay taxes every day for the fire department down the street. Not that I want that fire department to come to my house until there's a crisis, but I pay a small fee in my taxes in order to get that capability. That's the same thing that I've argued to Army senior leaders, that we should be doing the same thing with industry when it comes to watercraft. I don't need to have all the watercraft I need today because I don't have an operational use for it. But in a time of crisis, I do. So I, through a contracting methodology, think we ought to be paying some money in order to leverage industry's capability that says, if I pay you a handling fee, a holding charge, then when the time of need, maybe in 45 days, you start delivering me these type of watercraft, these type of connectors, so that I can augment the joint force out here in the Pacific. I think everybody sees this as a business model, much off of like U.S. Transportation Command's voluntary, ship program, visa program, where you are basically a strategic vessel on retainer. I want to do the same thing with the intra-theater lift on retainer. I pay an industry a small amount of money. Every once in a while, I will rehearse through an exercise with them, a rehearsal, pay them some money, activate the vessel, campaign together out here in the Pacific, and then it can go back to doing civilian business. But we start figuring out the reps and sets of training together in order to meet the future need. I think that's the way we want to go. That's the contracting methodology that we have to change I want a long-term contract, because again, I need to send a long-term demand to industry. And I'm talking a 10-year contract that puts their watercraft on a retainer. Every once in a while, I'll activate them, pay them full fair market value for their watercraft, train together out here in the Pacific, and then they can go back to their civilian commerce. I think that also builds an incredible amount of flexibility to the commander, and more importantly, sends a strong demand signal to not only U.S. industry, but quite frankly, to allies and partners that where they may think there's a perceived lack of capability, there's no perceived capability gap. It's here, and it'll come forward at the time and choosing of our need.
Excellent. I want to be sparing with your time, General. Before I go, you mentioned a new watercraft, and you mentioned the scale or the scope of the amount of armor that could move. I'd like to revisit that real quickly. Tell us a little bit, if you could, sir, what that is and what kind of capacity it might bring, and what's in the pipeline as far as growing this program for the future.
Yeah, so the Army currently has a couple of watercraft systems, and the one I talked about that can carry 24 M1s today is a LSV. That's been around for a while. It's older, and so the Army, has to start thinking about what is the future. Do you purchase a new one of those, or where I personally think, the technology of autonomous vessels is going to come online in the future, and I think you might have a control ship with lots of other vessels that can do the same speed, maybe even faster than our current watercraft, and range of what we currently use today. So again, I create a dilemma. I've got a control ship that then spiders out in multiple avenues of approach and then converges at the time and need to deliver combat power where we want it, doing it autonomously. So now I'm putting less risk on sailors, but I'm still delivering the combat power ashore. That's where I think the future is. And I think the Army is spending a lot of experimentation kind of studying this. What are the pros? What are the cons? Clearly, there always wants to be a human in the loop. That's important. But I do think, our ability to deliver logistics ashore most of the time could probably be done autonomously in the future. And that would be, my recommendation to senior leaders. And I think that is ultimately what we're all looking at as well, as to how do you leverage that forthcoming technology that is already here. Now it just needs to be properly scaled.
Now the lights are going on. I understand what you're saying to a larger degree about this disaggregated formation and how that improves survivability. Instead of a condensed, large manned operation of a vessel going from point A to point B in a linear fashion, there could potentially be, as you point out, General, 50, hundreds of unmanned autonomous vehicles that independently bring the equipment where it needs to go, arrive at the predetermined destination. Not only makes it harder, more dispersed targets for an enemy, but also can use autonomy and networking. That seems to be kind of where you're helping to bring the future to the Pacific Command in this respect.
Chris, you just hit the nail on the head. My kids would put a 100 underneath that comment. As in exactly. That is exactly what we want to do. That is, we aggregate, disaggregate, and aggregate at the time and place of our choosing, and autonomy is going to get us there. And it creates a unbelievable survivability, flexibility, agility to do that. And then fundamentally, that then frees up, by the way, some of those protection assets to go on the offense versus the defense if we can have, sustainment operating under that methodology.
You can't hit an armored force moving from point A to point B across the water from the air if there are 100 different targets. Certainly makes it a complicated predicament for an enemy, as you point out.
It becomes very expensive.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. It reminds me of the Space Force and the idea of redundancy and disaggregation. If one node is taken out, and you mentioned this before, that there's built-in technology to enable a kind of meshed network system wherein one node may go down, other ones will flex and accommodate and reroute or readjust. So there can in fact be a synergy in the middle of a war scenario.
I think if you look at what Star Shield and Starlink and those kind of LEO satellites, to your point of a mesh network, you put up a lot of small satellites up there. One goes down, they just self reorganize instantaneously. It would be the same thing from a autonomous watercraft. Sure, you sink one small vessel, I got another 1,000 coming.
Roger that. Well, gosh, the Navy's USV with Ghost Fleet, they're looking at how unmanned vehicles can work in tandem with one another using algorithms to respond to contingencies, share information. Perhaps there's a weak point in an enemy perimeter. Perhaps there's a development along the coastline. Perhaps, as you point out, with human in the loop, there can be the use of lethal force. These are all things that the Navy has been doing as well in an increasing capacity. It's got to be the thing that you're working with them on and these multi-domain task forces.
Absolutely. Look, the partnership between the Army and the Navy and its ability to think and act and operate differently is fundamentally what makes our military so great. We're not stuck in the past. We're always innovating, and this ability to use disaggregated networks, disaggregated firing platforms, or in this case, disaggregated sustainment elements is exactly how we think we create the complex dilemmas that, really you got to be pretty good at to deal with. That's graduate level work. And we're pretty confident that those adversaries out there right now aren't ready for that graduate level work. It's really tough to handle. It's really tough to deal with. But I can assure you that our joint forces work in this all the time together to make this a dilemma for others.
Speaking of, there was a publicly published U.S. Army Pacific war game called, I think it was Pacific United or something.
United Pacific, yep, the United Pacific War Game series.
Oh, great. I'm glad, sir. I'm glad I got that close enough or close. My question is, one of the principal findings was the need for PED, or processing, exploitation, dissemination. You have such a massive information. You need algorithms and AI-enabled systems to find those moments of relevance, to distill otherwise impossible or limitless volumes of information. What are some of the ways from a logistics standpoint is Sustainment Command looking to support that mission of increasing and improving and empowering PED and information processing?
Well, look, again, I think this is where you steal best practices from industry. If I can sit on a tablet at home and I can look through an unbelievable catalog, make some decisions, put it in my cart and hit press and send, and that goes out to the greater business network that then figures out all the different locations, all the different warehouses those are, and it starts those movements that ultimately end up probably into the same plane or ship that then delivers it to me out here in Hawaii. That exact same technology is what we're using as the Army, but it's also a part of Defense Logistics Agency. What are we doing with the Air Force, the Marines, and the Navy, so that all of our current segregated supply systems go up to a mesh cloud, get integrated, and then we maximize the transportation network to get it out here to theater. That will be, again, both contracted, military, and partnered in order to deliver all those supplies to the Joint Force Forward. But you can only do that through AI, machine learning. And so as we leverage the way industry does this, look, we're stealing their best, and I say stealing because we're paying for it. Let me make that clear. Hey, we're taking their best practices and implementing it as a military in order to implement exactly that out here, because it is exactly that challenging.
Well, there's a specific and exact way in which Sustainment Command is responding to the predicament and the challenge outlined in that war game. It's like exact almost in terms of what you were saying